This ain't something. See every day. Evening, folks. My name's William Maxfield, and I'm not really sure why they invited me here tonight, because I led a pretty simple life, and not like some of these other people, near heroes, that you're going to meet tonight. I was a farmer all my 76 years. Never married. Well, couldn't really see much use of it. And I used to I'd pick apples in my orchard and then peddle them door to door in Loudon Village. And, you know, certainly my looks was, you know, I didn't dress up or anything like that. And, you know, some people might have thought I was a pauper, you know, down on my luck. Well, you know, looks can be deceiving. Looks can be deceiving. So, people got a big surprise after I passed. I passed about 1905. Cardiac dropsy. And, well, I had a 119-acre farm, land in Loudon and Canterbury and Concord, and I had 3 lots in Loudon, one with a house that I rented out. Then I had 3 more lots on Pine Street in Pennacook. I don't know if anybody knows that. And one of those had a house on it, and then a couple of lots in Concord. I'm trying to fix this old apple wagon. It's been a loyal companion. And so when I died, there was a lot of estate, $16,692 that I left to the town of Loudon. I left $2,000 for the express purpose of building a library, and by God, they named it after me. And about $950, I think, to the Baptist, Free Will Baptist Church. It used to be up here on Baptist Road. What I hear, it got dismantled in 1964 and moved to the Tilton Academy. Well, not everybody was happy, and so five of my relatives went to court to overturn the will, and they claimed that I had been misrepresented, over persuasion, that I was incompetent, and you know, they said it was not drawn up by an attorney in front of 3 credible persons, and it was. I sat down a month before my death, cardiac dropsy, and I made out my will with 3 sober persons in attendance, and my attorney, of course. And so that case just got thrown right out, and they ended up having to split $760 9 ways. And so the other thing that was in my will was a monument, a lot like this. My friend George Armstrong had it on his family plot in Clough Pond Cemetery, and I really admired it. And so I asked for one of those on the family plot, and they did such a good job. I am so pleased with that. And then finally, the last stipulation, the most important, was that my farm never be sold. And so it's still public land today, and it is, you know, open to walk in and talk in. My farmhouse ain't there anymore, just a cellar hole, but it's a nice cellar hole. And, you know, so stop by and take a walk and say hey to me, and think about me when you have an apple. And I thank you for listening to my story. I really appreciate it.
Now, my friends, My name is Dr. Mary Mills Parker, and I was born here in Canterbury in 1850. My grandfather was the minister at the church across the way for over 40 years, and when he passed away, my father moved our family all the way out to Iowa. I graduated college there. What were you saying?
I said Iowa, that's where I'm from.
Iowa, wonderful Iowa, where it was very snowy and cold. I graduated from college there, and when I was 19 years old, the American Missions Board called me to be a teacher in Turkey. Well, my parents thought that was the ends of the earth, but I knew that this was the leading hand of God. So, my father brought me up to Chicago, and he put me and my trunk onto a train, and we went to New York, and from New York, I sailed on a ship all the way to London. Now, at that time, the Brooklyn Bridge was just beginning to be built, and Queen Victoria was in her own, and the major power in Europe was Germany. Travel across the continent was neither comfortable nor safe. And I spent many, many miles and many weeks traveling by riverboat and coach and even by horseback to get to my post in Turkey. Constantinople was a bustling city then, 60,000 souls strong. It was the third largest city in Europe. The roads were narrow and dark, but I soon learned how to navigate the city across the rooftops. My job there, my mission, was to help create a high school for girls. But girls and women in Turkey in those days had very little status and even less freedom. They were married at 11 or 12, and they were considered old women by the time they were 25. From my rooftop of my apartment, I could look across into the square of the Persian embassy. That's where the women of the royal harem often gathered. But even there, they had to have their veils on. It was said that Sultan Aziz had 900 wives, which he protected perpetually with the help of 300 eunuchs. So, our school became a place where girls could grow and learn. When I came into my own, eventually, this school became a college. It became the college called the American School for Girls. That was in 1890. Our school, and of course, I was appointed president. That was very important to me. Our school offered courses in all the liberal arts and sciences, including that new science, archaeology. And by the time the Great War ended, we had over 500 students enrolled. It was a dangerous time in Turkey because bombs were dropping and soldiers were walking through the streets, but we persevered. Through epidemics, through food and fuel and clothing shortages, we kept our college open. Then, one day, I was walking through the streets of the city, and I saw a commander of the armed forces talking to a group of women who were dressed completely in black, from head to foot. He told those women what a wonderful thing it was to know the joy and glory of having a son who would give his life for his country. Well, one woman stepped forward and she bowed very low and she said, "Your Excellency, thank you for your kind words. And may your mother also soon know this glory and joy." Well, many sons and husbands did not return from the war, and women began to take on roles that had previously been set aside only for men. They became lawyers and doctors. They became business owners and even government agents, like postal clerks. And within a decade, they were allowed to leave their veils at home. In 1924, I resigned as college president. I had lived in Turkey over 50 years under 5 separate sultans, and I tell you, I would have stayed for 50 more, but it was not to be. So I sailed home, I lived in New York, and I wrote a book about my impressions of Turkey and all my fabulous adventures there. When I was just short of my 90th birthday, God called me home to glory. God had blessed me with a life of service and learning and adventure, and that was perfectly suited to me. And I pray that you all will have those blessings as well as you continue on your journeys.
Good evening, friends. My name is Stephen Simmons Foster. Foster is a name you may recognize from Foster Road, just down here. That's where my family settled, and I was born in Canterbury in 1809. Now, I understand that you've come here this evening to learn something and to be entertained. But I'm afraid I can only promise you the first. You see, I was a very serious-minded man in life, and I have not lightened up one bit in death. In my time, I was consumed almost to the point of obsession with the blight of slavery on this great land. And I was dragged from some of the finest churches in these parts and beyond because of it. I came by my views honestly. My father was Colonel Asa Foster, who fought in the Revolutionary War and was known in town as an honest man. He was also an early advocate for freedom for the enslaved. Benjamin Kimball placed a stone, a monument to him, which you can see just over here. My mother was a Morrill, and that's a name you'll find gracing many stones in this cemetery, and of course, just down the road at Morrill Road. And I'm proud to say that I was the 9th of their 12 children. In my time, people called me a come-outer, a label that I wore with pride. It's from a passage in the Bible. The righteous are called to stand apart from unholy practices and unholy people. It's 2 Corinthians. Therefore come out from them and be separate from them, says the Lord, and touch nothing unclean, and I will welcome you. I took those words to heart when I entered the seminary to prepare for life as a preacher, but I found that hypocrisy abounds. I attempted to speak against war, only to discover that I was barred from the chapel. I was offered a scholarship if I would quit my abolitionist ways. I quit the seminary instead, and I resolved not to remain silent. I would preach from the pews. One Sunday in September 1841, I took my seat at the First Congregational Church in Concord and waited for the minister to begin his sermon. Then I rose, and in my mildest and friendliest tone, I declared that I must speak on behalf of the 2 million fellow citizens who were held in slavery. The minister told me to sit down, but I would not be silenced. The next thing I knew, 3 stout parishioners dragged me from the church and out into the street. By the end of 1842, I had been jailed 4 times and dragged from temples of worship no less than 24 separate occasions. I was even dragged from South Church in Concord twice in a single Sunday. Twice I was fined for preaching the gospel, Twice I was thrown from a second-story balcony with no regard to the consequences. Once, a mob of 2,000 tried to do me in, beating me about the head and neck until I was saved by a brave and noble woman. I do not complain, for my lot was far easier than that of the enslaved for whom I labored. And still, I would not be silenced. I wrote pamphlets for anti-slavery publications, and a pamphlet entitled The Brotherhood of Thieves, a true picture of the American church and clergy. I'm afraid the title gave the plot away. I was never one to hold back. None of this won me very many friends, but that was not my aim. I commanded attention, and that was a worthy result. The poet James Russell Lowell said of me, "He's like a maddened John the Baptist, to whom the harshest words come aptest." Pride is a sin, but I must confess I liked that. And I am pleased to tell you I did not walk this difficult path alone. While on the lecture tour in Pennsylvania, I met Abby Kelly. Abby Kelly, the first woman to speak to a mixed audience of men and women on the subject of abolition. She was also a believer in suffrage, and like me, she suffered for her convictions. We were married in 1845 and took to the lecture circuit, what I think people in your time might call a power couple. We advocated the end of slavery, full equality for people of African descent, and full equality for women. We settled in Worcester, Massachusetts, where Abby had been raised, and we landed in hot water there too when we refused to pay our taxes because Abby was not permitted to vote. You'll find my grave in the cemetery in Worcester, where I died in 1881. Thank you so much for listening and for your attention and for not dragging me from the cemetery this evening. I am not as young as I once was. May these specters and your conscience guide you forward.
Well, hello. My name's Clara Peverly, and I was born Clara Lovering in Loudon in 1860, and I had a perfectly ordinary childhood. And then when I was 17, I met a really extraordinary man. His name was Herman Mudgett. He was from Gilmanton, and he was handsome, he was smart, and he was just the most charming man you could ever hope to meet. And I was head over heels, and lucky for me, he loved me back. We eloped the next year on the 4th of July, and 2 years later we had a beautiful little baby boy, Robert. And then Hermie decided to go to medical school. I was so proud of him, and of course I supported him. And I missed him when he was away at school, but we would plan about all the things we would do together as a family after he graduated and started to make his way in the world. But then after he graduated, he had a hard time making his way. He kept moving around. He'd write me letters and tell me how he was pursuing the next big opportunity, but somehow the opportunities never really panned out. He never sent for us, and he never sent much money home. So I had to learn how to make dresses and open a dressmaking shop in Tilton. And little Robert and I lived over the shop just to make ends meet. And it went on like that for 10 years. And then one day, Hermie told me that he was moving to Chicago and he didn't want us to come with him. And I was pretty disappointed. But I loved him, and I didn't have a lot of other choices, so I waited for him. And it's a good thing that I'm a patient person, because I didn't hear another word from him for 6 years. Until one day, Hermie wrote a letter. And in this letter, he said that he had been in a terrible train crash, and he had fractured his skull and been in a coma for a really long time. And after he finally woke up from the coma, he had amnesia, and he couldn't remember who he was or where he came from. Until finally he remembered, oh, I'm Hermie Mudgett from Gilmanton, and I have a nice little family waiting for me in New Hampshire. And since that moment, he had wanted nothing more than to come home and be with us. And even though that sounds exactly like the plot of a really bad soap opera, I believed him. Soon we were reunited, and I was thrilled. Life was back on track. But like all the good times with Hermie, it didn't last very long. Just 12 days later, a detective came to tell me that my husband had been arrested for fraud. And that's when the awful truth began to come out. Over the next year, there were investigations into his crimes, and the world and I really learned together what this extraordinary man really was. I wasn't all that surprised to learn that there were other women, or even that he'd taken a lot of money from all those other women. I was surprised to learn that after he got the money, a lot of those women would just disappear. And I was more surprised to learn that he had married 2 other women, and he had 2 other children. Now, I never suspected him, and neither did his other wives. We just loved him, and we believed the stories he told us. And he told a lot of stories. He was a con man. He had run scams all over the United States. All that traveling around had nothing to do with the next big opportunity. It was all about staying one step ahead of his creditors, the investigators, and the law. But that wasn't all. He was a grave robber. He sold body parts. And, worst of all, he was a murderer. He was probably America's very first known serial killer. And once I really understood who the man I married really was, I never wanted anything to do with him ever again. Now, when he was in Chicago, he built this ordinary looking building, which he ran as a hotel. But it was no ordinary hotel. You could check in, but you might not ever check out. He liked trapdoors a lot, so it had trapdoors, and it had secret rooms. There was a torture room. There was a gas chamber. And in the basement, there was a vat where he could dissolve the bodies of his victims, and there was a furnace to burn the bits that wouldn't dissolve. Nobody knows how many people died at his hands in this building. It may have been as many as 200. But during the investigation, somehow, miraculously, the building burned down. What a coincidence. Now, he used a lot of names in his swindling, murdering career. He hardly ever used his real name, Herman Mudgett. But he became infamous as Dr. H.H. Holmes, and this place was infamous as his Chicago murder castle. Now, he was finally convicted of murder, and when I was 35 and Robert was 16, that awful man finally passed from this earth right through a trapdoor to the end of a hangman's noose. And weirdly, that guy, the grave robber, left instructions that his body should be buried extra deep in a coffin filled with concrete, covered with more layers of concrete, so that he would be safe from grave robbers. But don't worry, he's not buried here, and he's not here in the cemetery with us tonight. He is safe under his concrete in an unmarked grave near the prison where he was executed. Now that awful man fooled a lot of people, and I may have been the first one, but I was one of the lucky ones because I survived him, and I survived the shame of him. Can you imagine the reporters, the gossip, the whispering, and the horror of knowing that I had truly loved a truly awful man? But I got through it by doing two simple things. I lived quietly, and I was as good a person as I could be. Now that awful man couldn't do either of those things, but I did them every day, year after year after year, until finally my life became my own again. 11 years after that awful man was gone, I married John Peverly of Canterbury. And for a time, we lived together in this house, which is still standing. It's on Baptist Road. It's the yellow one, right across from Canterbury Hall. And John and I lived quietly together until he died in 1930. And then I lived another 26 quiet years until I was 95 years old, and I died too in 1956. John and I are buried in Maple Grove Cemetery, and we don't get a lot of visitors, so please stop by, say hello sometime. It's almost no one remembers quiet little Clara. Lots of people remember H.H. Holmes, but I will take my forgettable, quiet goodness over his infamous evil any day. And if there are any awful people who come into your life, I hope that you too will get safely away and go on to live your own good life. Now, I didn't like telling my story when I was alive, but it's been a long time now, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to tell you about it tonight. Thanks for listening, and good night.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Joseph Morrill Harper, and I was born in 1787 in Limerick, Maine. As you might imagine, growing up in a town by that name left me mighty fond of limericks. Why, have you heard the one about the peg-legged sailor?
Father, this is polite company and we're in the cemetery. Show a little respect.
Very well, Lizzie, very well. May I confide in you that being buried for eternity in the same cemetery as one's beloved daughter can be a mixed blessing. Now, where was I? Oh, Canterbury, yes. I moved here at the age of 24. Bought a farm down on Old Tilton Road, just yonder. Of course, in my time, no one called it an old road. It was the Tilton Road, and it was a thoroughfare. I would like to believe that, on the whole, I lived a worthy life. I'm proud to say that I served in the U.S. Army as an assistant surgeon during the War of 1812 and saw some terrible things. Here in Canterbury, I found my medical services much in demand. I took my earnings, invested them prudently, and made a goodly fortune in insurance and banking. My years of public service followed. Here's something you may not know. I am the only man from Canterbury to ever serve as governor of New Hampshire.
Oh.
Oh, mind you, I wasn't elected to the position. I was serving as Senate president when the elected governor was named a federal judge, so I filled out his term. But I did serve 2 terms in Congress. Indeed. This is a likeness of me taken during my prime years. As you can see, my hair migrated with advancing age. But with age comes wisdom, and I was blessed with the wisdom to follow the example of my upstanding wife. Did I mention her I don't think so. She was an upstanding young woman from a fine Canterbury family by the name of Elizabeth Clough. Together we had 3 children, 2 boys, and then my Lizzie. But you see, my wife believed in temperance, and so I followed her lead, touching neither a drop of alcohol nor a puff of tobacco for the last
Father,
20...
excuse me, are you quite sure about that? Because Mother did wonder about all the little bottles out in the barn.
Oh, this little thing, oh, it's cough medicine, dear. It says so right on the bottle.
But Father, you haven't a cough.
Exactly. It works. Now, you seem a lively crowd. But I must tell you, as you may have already gathered wandering among the tombstones tonight, that in time, the Reaper comes for us all. I lost my wife in 1862 at the age of 75, and I passed 3 years later at the age of 77 in 1865. Now, who do you think cared for me in my final solitary years of life?
Lizzie.
You're quite right. Don't tell the boys, but she was always my favorite. And the stories she can tell. Lizzie, you've made your presence abundantly clear tonight. Why don't you come forward and reveal yourself to these fine people?
I'm here, Father. I'm here.
It's good to see you again, Lizzie.
And you, Father. Thank you for that kindly introduction, though I believe he calls me favorite, so I won't tattle on him to Mother. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Harper Monmouth, and only my father calls me Lizzie. Thank you, Father. I was born in 1829, right here in Canterbury, and due to Father's shrewd investments, we were a wealthy family. I was educated at the Tilton Academy and went to finishing school in Rhode Island. By the time I was finished there, my older brother Charles had moved to Texas, and it was while I was traveling to see him that I paused in the South, and I lost my heart to a dashing Louisiana military man, Colonel Jacques Monmouth. We were married soon after we met. Unfortunately, 10 months later, the Civil War broke out, and my Jacques was one of the first to fall. I suddenly found myself a Yankee widow in the South and deemed it prudent to return to Canterbury with all due haste. And when I got here, I took up keeping house for Father.
And I am so grateful for you, my dear.
It was my pleasure, even though he was a bit of a trial to tidy up after. As you heard, this lasted just 3 short years, and Father passed in 1865. I was grief-stricken. However, he did leave me a sizable bank account and the farm. I was now well-to-do, having inherited from both Father and my husband, and as it is no punishment to look at me, you will not be surprised to hear that I had a great many admirers. Among them was a soft-spoken man who claimed he was a minister and promised to help me realize my dearest dream, which was to turn the farm into an orphan asylum. Well, guess what? My dream and all my money disappeared with that smooth-talking scoundrel. I was left with the farm, but no income. Oh, Father.
Oh, please forgive my display of emotion, but I am so sorry I wasn't there for you, Lizzie.
Well, I'm sorry you were dead too. But there was nothing I could do about that.
I suppose not, no.
But what I could do was make a budget. So I figured $20 for hay, $13 for pasturing my neighbor's horses, $3 for apples, and $15 for knitting socks for the Shakers. After I paid $10 taxes, that left me $40 to live on for the whole year. And if you are quick with a pencil, you will see that comes down to 10 cents a day.
10 cents a day. How did you survive?
Well, I survived my troubles by a combination of self-denial and arithmetic. I allowed half a dime a day for food, and the other half for necessities, which to my mind included books, a newspaper subscription, and charitable giving to those even less fortunate than myself. I ate corn, beans, and pork at most every meal. And when I got tired of that, and believe me, I did get tired of that, I bought 2 loaves of bread, some molasses, and a pinch of ginger for 23 cents. And every other month, I'd get a bucket of trimmings from the butcher for a penny.
Oh, Lizzie, I am 160 years dead, and this still breaks my heart.
It's okay, Father.
It
It's
does.
okay. He's such a soft-spoken man. It was a great challenge. And after feeding myself, I still had to get dressed. So I took men's boots and I lined them with flannel. I cut them down and I laced them to my feet. I made a warm cape and slippers from Father's overcoat. I searched the farmhouse and I found an old mattress. I pulled out the straw and I washed the blue and white striped ticking, and I made myself a skirt. From a distance, it looked like new and it wore like iron. I got so good at scraping by that I wrote a book, How to Live on Half a Dime a Day. In fact, and this is true, you can still get my book on Amazon.
Amazon. What is this Amazon of which you speak?
Well, I hear, Father, that the Amazon is a great river down south. And I believe that that is how they ferry the books up to us. Well, this brings us to 1871. At that time in Canterbury, over in Hill's Corner, was the Union Church. That was the same year as the Great Chicago Fire. And I was inspired to walk the 7 miles from the farm to the church and make a plea for the victims of the fire. A great collection was taken up, and the trustees were so impressed that they offered me the position of lay reader, which I gratefully accepted. Now, as a woman who appreciates things orderly,
Don't I know it?
oh, gosh, Father, I commenced to cleaning that church from top to bottom. One day, I was whitewashing the ceiling, and the ladder I was on broke, and I fell. I was gravely injured, and I could no longer walk the 7 miles from the farm to Hill's Corner. So in 1873, the trustees allowed as how I could move into the church. It was while I was living there that I invented, you will not be surprised to hear, an inexpensive way, Father, would you help me here?
Oh, of course.
To cover up the water stains on the walls and the ceiling. I took old cotton gauze and newspapers and wallpaper samples and donated window shades, all held together with worsted wool. And I made over 100,000 arches and decorations and scripture readings and covered the entire inside of the building. And the Union Church became known as the Worsted Church. And travelers from New York City and Boston who were heading up to the White Mountains would stop in to see my curious paperwork.
I believe eventually you passed, Lizzie.
I did, unfortunately. In 1887, due to ill health, I had to return to the farm. And there I died, just 57 years old. And that is my story. I started out as a wealthy man's daughter. For a short time, I was a Southern belle, and I ended up as a scrappy New England widow, pinching pennies, but with a historic art project.
Lizzie, I have long held that the true measure of success in life is not success, but how you respond to life's hardships. All jest and aside, I could not be more proud of you, dear.
Thank you for that, Father, though I am sorry I lost all your money.
Oh, yes, you did. Yes. Is that?
But I did inherit your good money sense. I want to thank you all for listening so attentively tonight. And be careful as you go. And remember, if you get scammed out of all your money, pork scraps are still a good bargain.
Good evening.
Good evening.
May I help you?
Please help me put this all back.